traces, I think, reads in the work. It definitely influences the projects, and it's also, of course, in an important context for me. The other context I wanted to put up is when we look at technology, and like I said in the beginning, I want to look back a little bit and trace how technology is used in the different times of the different projects. I also want to say that I think, depending on the current mindset that we have when we try to look back, or how we look at a certain topic at a certain time, is kind of framed by the mindset that we're in. And I think we're in a very different mindset now, collectively, as we were maybe 20 years ago. And I help myself, and I like to think of this idea of different anthropological spaces that we move through. And in the 90s, for example, and this is a diagram based on Pierre Levy, collective intelligence, where we were sort of as a collective in the space he calls knowledge, space of knowledge. And these spaces in that kind of understanding are the primary focus for social structure, for values, for beliefs. And I think there was a lot of belief in knowledge, in growth, in technology, in analysis. And I do think we're at a turning point, if not already kind of moving towards a new space. I call it space of consciousness. And I think maybe different values are starting to take hold, although I think old values maybe don't quite apply yet anymore, and the new ones are not quite there yet. But I think that overall, what the kind of values that maybe are the ones that we're moving towards are those values of a synthetic thinking, that where the things that we've analyzed and gone into smaller detail in the past decades, we're now trying to put together in a more integrative thinking, and a kind of thinking that I would call both and, instead of sort of an either or. And with that as a framework, I want to frame a position for how to relate technology and practice. And I would like to try to make the case that in the work that I have been a part of in the last decades, it is the idea or an inspiration that drives technology and not the other way around. So ideas initiate the use of technology, ideas initiate technological innovation, and also the pushing of boundaries within certain tools or technologies. And certainly the use of these technologies then allows us to reach results that otherwise probably wouldn't be accessible, but are kind of desired and inspired by that idea. And that position, I would like to see whether it takes hold or holds up in the different projects that I'm going to show. For us and for my experience in the office, it starts with the design process in this kind of open process, which is important because it involves connections and translations beyond certain sort of slivers of technology. And I would say one could do it the other way around and sort of try to advance within a certain tool. So on the horizontal in this kind of sketch, I think of different disciplines. I think of different tools or technologies that we're trying to advance in, but sort of in the case that, in my experience, it's been going beyond these boundaries and trying to connect thoughts that come from different disciplines, from different areas of thought. And it depends on that kind of vision and inner drive you have for a project or an idea, and not sort of with a set concept of coming from like within technology. And of course, this applies for everything from the conception of a project to the planning and all the way to construction. For a few years, we have put together this map, and it's a kind of tracing. Again, it's putting projects, ideas, technologies on a timeline. So on the horizontal is a timeline of spanning 50 years. And when you can follow my cursor there, the different sort of technological, like things we were able to use within architecture, starting with the early 90s, the introduction of 2D, 3D CAD, going all the way through CAD, CAM, possibilities to BIM, to the robot, to artificial intelligence now. And it's very interesting how this axis of technology kind of correlates with sort of value systems that are important at the time and keep changing, and how they relate to the projects. And so I've picked out a few projects that are close to me and that come from these different timeframes to see how the kind of innovations kind of course, relate to the time and the current status quo, but sort of try to open up new fields that then become available after that. So the first project is a small project that was built in the Netherlands. We developed it in the United States when I first went to LA. And again, so we're at the beginning of the 90s. This is 1993. It's a very analog process that leads to the formulation of this idea for a building. I don't want to go into detail because we don't have much time, but the innovation at the time was the wish to build this building just as it was in the model. And it was the time when we explored with digital scanning, in that case with this rudimentary space arm that we all still know. It resulted then in the first use of 3D models in architecture. This is 1993. Our model at that time, the full building had 12.6 megabyte. And it was an interesting sort of extreme collaboration between pencil, detailed drawings, and full 3D development of the building in the computer, and then direct fabrication. So it was sketch to 3D to fabrication, no traditional drawings, no traditional detailing. And this was, I still think of this project as a very far out project at that time, because we're talking almost 30 years ago. So directly built in the shipyard, different parts of the building assembled, pre-assembled, brought by ship, and then assembled on the site. So different discipline bridged with architecture, the kind of construction of architecture outside of the building industry, in the ship industry, and also the use of digital tools. Second project, 10 years later, we developed at the time in Mexico, again, an analog process leading to this idea for a cultural center. This is a very large project, as they came out then in the turn of the century or the turn of the millennium. The kind of point for innovation here is this large roof spanning 120 meters. And the wish to do this with the minimum amount of columns. And the invention in that project, I think, and digital tools made it possible. The co-development of architecture, structure, and climate design all in one in this large roof structure, and simulation tools, the possibility to calculate structures that are unbestimmt, now I don't know the English word, and the possibility also to start producing in a kind of cost time frame possible these irregular structures where every part is different. And this project was never built in Mexico, but the idea was transferred to several other projects that were built after, like the BMW World in Munich. So we look at this large structure spanning over 100 meters. It has only 11 supports, and this highly involved space frame that is also performing as the climate kind of generator in the project. And I think what the point I'm trying to make is this is where the digital had become standard practice in large offices, turning out work into the reality that used that technology kind of for all aspects of the production of this building, from the early kind of integration of structure and form, but then also all the way to construction on site. And I'm going to move through this project a little briefly or quickly. It's the project that took 7 years out of my life in the US. And it's same time as in the project that we've seen for BMW, and it also shows the kind of difference between use of technology in a kind of advanced way in the US, where a lot of ideas for using tools from other disciplines came from, but then when it comes to the building industry, was actually, compared to Europe, rather behind. I want to move to the next project because I think time is running and is very short. A project that was finished 3 years ago. So now again, we're 10 years later. We're still using this open process, and another small museum that was built in Linz, again, starting with analog work. We're having different tools now, like laser scanning for making that translation between the analog and the digital. And the innovation in this project, I think, again, born out of this idea of wanting to bring this kind of building into the world, was the innovation of using CNC milled cross-laminated timber for supporting wood shell structure, which eventually then forms this inside of this building. So not, again, the use of technology, sort of let's invent a new way or a way of making a free-formed structure out of cross-laminated timber, but the idea came kind of out of the idea of wanting to bring this building into the world. And now I want to show just 2 more examples of current work. We're interested in also exploring possibilities of AI, of artificial intelligence, but again, not to try to develop architecture within the technology of using artificial intelligence, but rather to plug it into this way of working the same way all the other tools are plugged in to then reach things we otherwise maybe wouldn't be reaching. And if this is a sort of map of a project development, how it is typically done from beginning to end in a kind of process, how we know it now. We identified a few possibilities of where, in these 3 green dots, where we could use artificial intelligence as sort of a plug-in tool. And the interesting thing now, neural networks like databases and huge amounts of data. So we've built up these databases of physical models of rendered buildings, sort of imagery of how massing translates into materiality, tectonics, and so forth, and detail, or also, as a third example, sort of environmental studies. And we train the data sets to correlate between the 2 as this first kind of area of investigation. And we, for example, get ideas of translation from the physical to from the analog model into a kind of suggestion for a materiality for that massing. And of course, it comes in many iterations. And even more interesting than in terms of plugging it back into a process and sort of re-evaluating those images as the possibility for developing architecture is the other way around, where actually some misreading is happening between what is given as an input. On the left is always the input. In this case, it's the imagery, and what comes out is sort of a 3D massing. And so what interests me is this kind of changed point of view, that we, with our minds that are so used to looking at certain things one way, is changed, and it's giving us different ways of looking at things, which then we can take as inspiration and utilize within a design process. So again, of course, it's not a closed process, it's an open process. And maybe it is also allowing us to actually real time, this is what we're working on now, a kind of real-time interface between a physical model and a kind of materialized image that either is used as the image per se, as a visualization, but also as an inspiration for materiality to go beyond this kind of conventional way of looking at things that we already know. And the last project I want to show is utilizing, again, physical models as a starting point, but also a digital, kind of a digital rendering of it, this time with digital photogrammetry. And what is interesting is that it's not shown in these images because they're black and white, but you get yet another layer of detail into the kind of the digital version or the virtual thought model that you're looking at the beginning of this process. And what I'm interested in now is how this kind of detail can actually translate into materiality directly. So it's not about, maybe it gives us a way for seeing materiality differently in terms of a different kind of tectonic, a different kind of material specificity that lies in the detail, and that is also a byproduct of sort of the scanning procedure, but it's not looked at just as form or as the spaces that result, but kind of an information into the materiality. And with that, I'm done, and I give the screen to Tiziano and Daniela. Thank you.
Hello. Okay, so shall we go straight for? So I share my screen. Share my screen with sound. And cool. So, sorry. Do you see my screen? Yes?
Yes, we see your screen.
Yeah, cool, cool. Okay, so basically, well, I'm Tiziano.
Hi, I'm Daniela. I'm happy to be back after some time, back to Innsbruck, at least virtually.
And thanks Gonzalo and Florina, I think, for the invitation, and the IARC organization. I'm sure this initiative will encourage a productive debate within the faculty and hopefully elsewhere. So we are both architects, researchers, and media artists, and I think Gonzalo gave us a very generous introduction. And so I'm currently in the faculty and PhD fellow with the chair of Marian and researcher at the Angewandte. And Daniela, like Gonzalo mentioned,
I'm currently at the ETH Zurich. I'm doing my PhD here in intuition in digital design and robotic fabrication. Great. So our office mate, Büro für Architektur und Transmediale Kunst, is an interdisciplinary studio founded in 2016 in Vienna, with the aim to critically locate new technologies within novel human-animal machine entanglements. Today, our talk will be a bit of a hybrid, with one foot in the technical realm and with one in the creation of architecture as hyperlocal integrated fragile ecosystem. The project you can see here, the Hay House, is one of these fragile ecosystems. It was a physical articulation of a digital project. It's a manifested ritual space for the Tyrolean view of the ritual of Tischzirchen. And this project used a fabrication method. We used a Christmas tree wrapping tool and hay to create on the location of this ritual a physical articulation. And by that, combine it and make it very hyper-local and make it this kind of ecosystem. As a young practice, we love the idea of navigating the discipline through different technologies and around projects that are often named as not within architecture, but are very tangential, and we always situated and deal with spatial questions. Our office implements digital tools, computation fabrication in a seamless flow, creating emotional paraspaces. We see our work present across media and across scales. One of the projects that is really across scales is the one you can see here. It's the nanoscale castle. It's printed on the tip of a pencil, and it's actually the size of half of a hair. And it shows also that our office works a lot with scientists, as you can see here, very interdisciplinary, because we really try to expand the realm of architecture to biomaterial research, robotics, interface development, as well as art and science.
So like Daniela mentioned, we really see our work as a seamless interaction, no? between computation, but as well between the material and the virtual. And as Daniela mentioned before, this condition of hybridity of media sometimes it collides with the production of a purely computer graphics topics that goes, like in this case, from laser scanning to motion tracking. And in some other cases, so in this case as well, with cultural values such as the link at the bridge to computational technologies to culture, such as with the ritual of Krampus. While in other cases, like in the case of the castle tip and the pencil, our navigation somehow interact with speculation and research, applied research, to very concrete scientific areas. And in this case, we found an incredible value on applying, for example, our expertise in this case of tissue engineering to contribute to scientific development. Normally, when we hear about practice in architecture, we really expect to be confronted with something that is very declarative, no? A building or the representation of it. It is something that we can all understand somehow very well. We love also to discuss architecture in those terms. However, we believe we should also make the effort to recontextualize the discipline towards a condition that is more sensitive to a certain immediacy in time and space.
We understand architecture not as an isolated unit, but something that is woven off and woven into its habitat, and at the same time woven off and woven into its fabrication setup. The architecture bodies and the environment are co-constituents, engaging in a constant reconfiguration of the world. We see the world as a set of impulses and interactions, with architecture as a part of it. In the two forthcoming projects that we would like to show you, architecture, the human body, or body in general, materials and the environment become these co-constituents, on which architecture and space are profoundly dependent on. Tools, devices, and computation allow creating an interface and bridge the subjects with its habitat and other subjects. The act of discussing the relational nature of subjects is actually a political one, as any discussion on the body happens on a political level. The German word Umwelt, in comparison to Umgebung, describes something with which a living being has a causal relationship rather than a purely spatial one. And I think this describes very well how we understand architecture.
Well, the Paoeoe Beauty and Terrestrial Reef were basically two projects developed within the faculty in collaboration with our studio and together with the chair of Maria Colletti. So the first project was presented in occasion of the Ars Electronica Festival in 2018, while the second one in the occasion of the RHS Chelsea Flower Show. Both projects are grounded within a research into hybrid robotic additive manufacturing that combines basically robotic binder jetting processes with organic composites for highly biodegradable structures.
Yeah, thanks. The whole research about soil 3D printing started actually with the question how we can develop novel fabrication strategies for more sustainable and reversible additive manufacturing processes using biomaterials and robotic fabrication. More specifically, we were interested in exploring the potentials of so-called low-grade organic materials such as soil. Soil as a building material offers a cheap, sustainable alternative to fuel-based material system, but nonetheless, current developments of digital fabrication and additive manufacturing technologies overlook the potentials for such low-grade organic materials, such as soil.
The very key feature of this research is really to introduce biodegradable material systems into robot fabrication. So important parameters of this process are spanning from the studying of the mechanical behavior of soils to the use of hydrogels as a binders. Soil 3D printing is based on an additive manufacturing process very similar to binder jetting, where basically the deposition is achieved by a process of chemical binding. First, there is a loose aggregate, is dispensed into the layer, and then it's compressed. The soil is contained into a boundary condition, and subsequently a binding agent is deposited. So this process is repeated over and over again. Soil 3D printing is a double-step, multi-step fabrication. So all the printing parts are excavated afterwards.
The first iteration, and I saw some of our students and people we worked with are actually also here in the call. Hi to you. So the first iteration was exhibited in 2018 at the Ars Electronica in Linz, which is, for the ones who don't know, a festival in Austria for technology and electronic arts. And the concept of the piece was the creation of an anti-garden, a machinic landscape, a chimera of both natural and man-made materials, objects and species, with a specific techno-organic aesthetic. We built this performative space out of 40 tons of soil, including 14 individual soil 3D printed pieces. Paoeoe Beauty is a robotically fabricated environment, a black atmosphere. Can you go to slide before? Thanks. A black atmosphere of an extraterrestrial seeming environment. This anti-garden is full of machinic voices and eyes. So you see, we have computer algorithms and at the same time unearthly seeming mushrooms. The robot on the right hand observes through its mechanical eye its own creation. It ensnares to it, it sings to it. It reads the landscape that it created as a soundscape, and it develops a relationship through the distance of the look. The role of the human that you can see on the left side was continuously questioned and interchanged. So you have on one side the mechanical eye and on the other the biological, and both are set equal in this ecosystem of Paoeoe Beauty. The human actually becomes a visitor in this biomachine, in a pseudo-natural world. where he's not allowed to enter without any protection. In this scenario, the installation is conceived as a plurality of events that happen simultaneously using machine vision and sound generation that you can hear here. The installation inhabits 3 robotic arms, whereas each one is equipped with a camera on the front. The machine becomes the interpreter of the landscape, able to modulate the perceptible, emotional makeup of the landscape. Each robotic arm uses a camera feed and filters the dominant surface features of the geometry. Those features are then translated into audible sounds that produces a real-time sonification of the space. Because the material soil was highly volatile and responsive to the environmental changes of the room, such as humidity, increased temperature due to visitors' presence, etc., the sound of the whole structure actually changed over the course of the exhibition.
So this condition just described, we can really reframe it as a sort of form of mediated nature, no? That does not only challenge our response and interaction with both the built and the natural environments, but it also represents an opportunity to really redesign and reorient the decision-making process of design and manufacturing and digital fabrication. From a technical standing point concerning the use of organic materials with the installation, we wanted to really confront the visitors with something seen for the first time, and something that was escaping any sort of cultural association with the dominance of specific technologies or tools using during the production. Slightly different, yes. A little delay here, sorry. Slightly different is the case of terrestrial reef. No? Terrestrial reef is a 21st century techno-organic reef consisting of both natural and synthetic elements. The project reflects on the often troubling and incompatible and even oppressive binary relationship we have between the built and the natural environment, as defined by the Western modernity, opposing an alternative to current cultural association to nature as a green or nature as a sustainable. Within this framework, the terrestrial reef tried to declinate the word nature towards the word terrestrial. The term terrestrial refers to the idea that humans and non-human agents are not limited by frontiers and dichotomies, but embedded into a continuum, into one another. The vital character of this approach and its coordination with biotechnologies enable a transformation and negotiation of new borders of life and a renegotiation of the terms living, artificial, or synthetic. Within this context, human species and technologies are not specified but considered as earthbound, quoting Bruno Latour. We may start within this frame to really look at the word terrestrial as a point of departure to encompass and promote other agencies, able to de-optimize the way we look at the world, and deconstructing the false belief of precision towards new form of intelligence and autonomy. Terrestrial reef is constituted simultaneously by 2 different methodology of production, in situ and in vitro technologies. The first, in vitro technologies are currently, like we see in the picture, applied as a form of micropropagation to cultivate in a controlled environment a very specific fungal species, the Ganoderma lucidum. While the second context referred to the in situ methodology of manufactured substrate. The blending here of biology and technology, or more precisely, biological life and fabricated environments, constitute a novel diagram of the built environment, governed rather by renewal, evolution, and degradation. This project reflects quite directly on the urgency and importance to develop a completely new industrial ecology that integrates life, biomaterials, and biodegradability within digital and robotic fabrication.
The second big field of research we would like to show you is called the eye of the other. And it talks about this causal relation that we talked before, this multi-layered fabric that architecture has. And this multi-layered fabric can also relate to many and different subjects, which can be human or non-human. The eye of the other is a project dealing with inter-subject interaction, enabling a communication through the creation of a sensorial apparatus between humans and animals. And more specifically, the eye of the other, as you can see here, is about bats. And the project delves into the non-verbal communication between humans and the nectar-feeding bats. And through the study, translation, and the manipulation of the bat's echolocation, we start to create novel spaces, nature and architecture. The multi-modal immersive installation derives from desire to transcend the limitations of our human living experience, but by exploring the deeper meaning of mutualistic relationships and interspecies communication between human and animals.
How can we tap into new modalities of interspecies communication? Beyond language as a verbalization lies an entirety of sound and impulses, a primary language loaded with completely different levels of information. How can we speak with another form of life whose language is untapped and unheard by us? Bats, although more closely related to us than other species, present a sensory apparatus which is very different to ours. A nectar bat has to find hundreds of tiny flowers each night in a highly cluttered rainforest, sorting out visual, olfactory and sonar information. The question is, how can we understand, even somehow, these multimodal signals and cues processed, which are very different to our own visual and olfactory system? To study and translate what a bat sees, specific technologies and algorithms had to be used. For this purpose, we use pre-recorded bat calls and additionally produce synthetic echolocation patterns using machine learning techniques. The piece depicts a sonogram of the echolocation calls of the nectar-feeding bats, so-called convoluted impulse responses. Multiple impulse responses build an echo fingerprint, which shows a very specific echo pattern of a flower observed by the animal. As the generated perfect impulse response is not what the bat actually hears or sees, we used convolution to remap the recording towards the specific frequencies of the bat, using generic bat calls to filter these frequencies. These echolocation patterns can teach us which geometry attracts the bat and which repulses it. Nectar-feeding bats can also be trained to learn a geometry and fly towards it when discovered. For that, we produced 3D printed artificial flowers, using these discovered patterns of reflections. Additionally, we used synthetic pollen to fill the flower with food for the bat.
You're muted.
Just realized, thanks. That was a short summary of the project. What you can see here is a quote by Borges that describes the different categories of animals. Those we can eat, those we watch television with, and those we are scared of. And the bat is definitely falling in the last category. Usually culture reflects on nature in a very dualistic fashion, like fluctuating between biophilia or biophobia. The Eye of the Other wants to offer a post-anthropocentric vision beyond these dualisms. The project reflects ultimately upon the term human as a description of a concept which implies interspecies relationship, dealing primarily with the effects of our entanglements with other living selves, the understanding of their behaviors and our domains of interactions with them. This is a picture of our exhibition in Bourges. Bourges was at Auvert, curated by Jens Hauser. And it was, the idea of the installation was to dissolve architecturally the image of the cage by creating an indoor habitat that allows the bats to stay. So the plan was to actually share the space with the bats. The decision of creating the space included a series of actions necessary to let the bats adapt to the required temperatures, instead of the other way around. Temperatures and humidity of the entire room hosting the artwork was regulated and adapted to the artificial environment. Suddenly, everyone was entering into a tropical setting. The nectar-feeding bat, the Glossophaga soricina, is a species that is very sensitive also to UV rays. Therefore, we used very specific light, the IR red light system that you can see here. Because the bats are nocturnal animals, a regime of inverted photoperiod was installed. Those light cycles allowed the exhibition to be carried out during day and actually to fit the active period of the bats with the active period of the visitors. For this purpose, a combination of blue and red bulbs worked well to simulate moonlight for the bats. In this way, the light changes was very, very gradual, and it actually supported the animal. For the specific species, we also, all the plants you can see here, there were specific plants for the bat. And the flowers that you can see on the right side, the artificial flowers, were fitting to the geometries that the bats like. So they were the actual feeding apparatus.
So the project, of course, holds together two different environments of experimentation. So the one of the field, where we basically directly measure specific conditions, in this case, how the sound was reflecting on the specific flowers. And at the same time, the environment of the lab, where basically there is a sort of reproduction of the animal environment, and as well there's a sort of stimuli for the animal to react to this artificial environment. As Daniela mentioned before, with the project, we give particular emphasis to the translation of the bat case echolocation into other media. So we arrived, therefore, to develop a series of geometries and synthetic flowers that created, at the same time, a simultaneous spatial and multimodal experience, auditive, olfactive, visual, for both animal and the human. So the bat gaze in juxtaposition to the human gaze. This process also consider, of course, the involvement of the visitor within this very specific environment, and the adaptation of the visitor to this inverted photoperiod timing. As you see here as well, specific attributes of the topological condition of the flowers are emphasized to really perform into this night situation. We find, of course, the creation of in the creation of the interface, on the visual interface, the domain that holds together the human and the animal, a domain of reference that is necessary to translate, modulate, and downsample signals from the human to the bat, and vice versa. While the use of different media creates a layered system of we could call it rewarding, based on food, on smell, and on geometry attributes that are stimulating at the same time the animal curiosity and as well the human curiosity. Currently working on trying a sort of an autonomous system of those flowers. We have in mind to the coming months to place those directly in the Vienna Zoo. So therefore, we are developing a way to automatize directly the pollination of the flower, and to link somehow the dispensation of food as a vehicle to create a new alphabet of signals meaningful for the animal.
So this project that we give you a rough overview of, why do we think that it's important to do these things as an architect? We really believe that doing this kind of projects have direct implications in the domain of architecture, because you continuously question architecture and space in itself, in a political way, in a computational way, in an architectural and spatial way. And what we are really trying is to create these performative and entangled environments, where usually architecture is understood as something that is encapsulating and isolating, having an inside and an outside. And with our project, it's really more a conversation and interaction between subjects that define and articulate the spaces that we design. Yes, that's it with our presentation. We give the word back to Gonzalo. And of course, you find more on our homepage if you want to see more of our projects.
Okay, thank you very much to both presenters, or the three presenters. Before we start the conversations, I would like to ask actually the audience to switch on their cameras. So at least we have a sense of audience, a minimal sense of audience. Whoever has, if you have your room clean enough how to show it, then switch on your camera, I would say.
Hey, humans!
Yes, exactly.
Oh, it's great!
So now it's what I'm supposed to say, something clever and smart to keep up the level high, but I'm not sure if I will handle the situation, because I think there are a lot of topics, a lot of interesting topics coming beyond actually just theory and practice. And I will just bring a few of them on the table, and then let's see how you react. And to be a little bit more methodic, I will start actually with what the topic of the session was, which is this theory, this technology and practice. And obviously, I think there are, in the two presentations, two different ways of approaching and understanding what technology does in design and in practice. So, and I think both of the presentations touch a little bit about it, because on the first one, in the work of Caroline and in Schmidbaur, I think the role of technology, it's more a tool within a larger goal in my reading. And actually you said a sentence that was you said a sentence, is Caroline, that was quite straightforward, in the sense that you see inspiration that drives technology and not the other way around. So technology, again, is a medium for a larger end or goal. Whether in your case, Daniela and Tiziano, I see that you have a different approach to technology that is not only, or is not the medium, but is actually an end in itself somehow. And so I don't know if you will agree, or if you can elaborate it a little bit more on that. I give the word to Caroline if she has something to say about it, or if she will agree with that. You're mute, Caroline.
Sorry, one moment. No, I think, I mean, I put out that point, right? Because I think, for one, it's in the work, how I have experienced it and how I believe in it. There is always this larger framework that you operate under. And of course, what I showed are projects that are rooted in practice. So it is architecture to be going out there to be built. And we do on the side do experiments that sort of explore the technologies themselves. I didn't show that today. I tried to make the bridge of when we have looked at things, how we bring them into the projects that then are really, or the processes, how they really materialize and turn into architecture. And so definitely I would say, yes, we didn't set out or we're not just exploring possibilities of utilizing the robot as a main focus, but we do use the robot in studio for certain tasks. We explore how we can use it in construction so that the next project or complex structure that we're interested in may have a possibility to be realized. So the kind of the investigation is done on the side, and then it's kind of it brings its way into the projects. So I try to see where those moments are of translation and how it then manifests in buildings. But I definitely would agree what you're saying, that that definitely for us it's a plug-in and not a means to an end in a way. But I think the other is equally important, right? Because certain things are sort of out there and available, it's also possible to build them into the practice that way. But I mean, I see a scale difference also or in a kind of agenda difference, if or I guess it's also what I chose to show. I thought it's important to show how technology sort of leads to then in a way the architectural product in the end, and not the process.
Daniela, Tiziano?
I go first? Yeah, okay. I don't know. I mean, I see it more. So I don't know if there is a kind of use of technology to justify it, just as a mean to justify the end. No? So I think there are kind of course there are different approaches here that are playing a role. But the way how I see it is almost like to connect 2 points. No, you can connect 2 points in many different ways. Basically, no, you can connect 2 points with the straight line, or you can do a very wondrous path. No, so that's how I think in the second possibility, let's say the second scenario, that's how I see how we use technology. No. So that there are some passages that sometimes are not so linear and not so direct in the way how we use different media. So it's a transversal section of technology as a reference through different media. And by all these wondrous somehow accidents, then there is a point of arriving somewhere with these technologies. So I don't think technology is the ultimate is the ultimate goal. In our case, I just think that there are different ways of connecting to 2 points, sort of. I don't know. What do you think, Daniela?
Yeah, I agree. There's definitely, the construction site in itself has different requirements, has a different speed than if we talk on a big scale, on a smaller scale. So I think in that moment, we definitely have on a smaller scale a bit of the luxury to test more things. We have luxury of failure, right? And what we use technology for is really we are a bit careful also with technology, because it instructs and directs the way you think. And at the same time, it can enhance the way you think. And that's very often not taken care of because it's a means to, for instance, I don't know, to reach a design step, but actually your action of activating an algorithm, downloading an algorithm, using the algorithm without coherently understanding it is leading you, for instance, to arrive at a specific endpoint of your thought. And that's something we try to avoid. And we always talk of an amalgamation of the design process. So we don't design in a linear fashion. We are almost designing in different moments. That's why we always say it's a mixture of a lot of things, where we say, even if we work with soil and robots, at the same time, we let the material in itself articulate a space in the design in itself. So I think technology in our practice is very much used to develop new thoughts that otherwise we might have not reached yet. And also with the bat, that's why we showed that project, because it's something that out of our own desire might have not come out like that. It's not it's of course at one point a shape we like, but at the same time it's a shape that, for instance, the bat desires, and suddenly you kind of negotiate the result. So it's almost, that's why we say it's technology is, but then not only in the production. It's true that we also see it embedded within the architecture. So it's also a lot. We call it an interface, something that allows us to not just produce the architecture, but also keep the architecture in itself a space of negotiation that we think might be necessary to not just produce it, but also question what they reproduce. Therefore, the robots that not just produce it and then you don't see the robots, but actually the robots are thought as a part of the overall ecosystem that is created.
I think that it's a point, because what I think both positions agree is actually in the sense that in a way technology is a helper to go beyond what human computation can do, right? Naturally, and I think the goals are oriented in different directions. That's for sure. But I think the common point is that I don't know if would you say that technology to some extent could be a kind of a black box that you just want to play around in order to get something unexpected. So this question of the unexpected beyond what human computation can do or understand, I think this is also a topic that we can discuss. So this will be another point that I will bring on the table. The second one is actually pretty much related to that, is the question of intuition. I think of human intuition, right? That in both position, in both stances, is again extremely predominant, right? And I think in the design process that Caroline explained, it was or it is extremely anchored, right? So the designer, or the intuition of the designer out of the, how should I say it, has still the chance to create the criteria out of the technological outcomes that can be produced. At least I read it in that sense. And so I would say that the relations in between in the intuition or and technology, in the first case, it's pretty much based on the sense of the design process, right? For the architect and the designer. I don't know how much is this role of the intuition with technology in the experience of an spectator, and whether in the second case, in my case, I rather see almost the opposite. So you speak, Daniela, a little bit about how intuition or the relations human technology play a role in your design process, although in your presentation was not clear. I always thought that you were more interested in this intuition for the spectator rather than for you in the design process. So if I can summarize this long comment, I would like you to speak about again this idea of the intuition, whether it is in the design process or in the spectator's experience in relation to technology, obviously, and then within the design process and the designer, this idea of the going beyond human capacity, of computational capacity, and this idea of the technology as the black box.
Who's going first?
As you like.
No, I mean, I think, I don't know, obviously, obviously in our work, this idea of the body is very present. So you talk about intuition, and it's the idea of you drive the process, and of not wanting to be confined within a sort of system that maybe directs the outcome, and or to a certain extent, or to too much of an extent. So there's always this term of a linear process or a nonlinear process, of an open system or a non-open system, and in keeping the process open, you switch between media. And I think, in a way, I've seen this in Daniela's and Tiziano's work as well. There is a switch of media that you move between. When you get to the limit of one, you switch perspective and you go to another. And I mean, it's something that we're doing as well. And I totally agree that you reach your limit. You could never do without technology anymore. You reach a limit of what you can, also of what your mind is sort of producing. And so to me, the goal is always the kind of dialogue and the translation between. And I always think that in the translation between media is where you find a new point of view, and a new, maybe you go with an idea to a certain extent, you get stuck, you look at it from a different point of view, you find a different way of looking at it and of moving it forward. And so it's, and I like what Tiziano said, if you come from both ends, you always have to try to look at something from both ends, and then you find the space in between, and you try to move closer to the solution. And so, yes, maybe I'm also, like I tried to say, when I started working, there were no tools yet, no digital tools, right? And so I have that in myself. To me, it's like you add tools. You keep going as you go, and you add possibilities. You never let any go, and it gets more and more and more. But for me personally, I have certain things inside of me that I still need to sort of build into the process, and it includes the physical, it includes the analog, and I think it's very important. But then it plugs in all the other possibilities as well. I don't know whether it makes sense, but I think the solution is in the translation and in the combination. And yeah, if you stay on one side or the other, I think there is at some point you cannot move further anymore. So.
Yeah, I think we agree on that one, especially on the translation part. I think it's almost where you have the most hard time, no? Every time you translate from one medium to another, it's the crux. It's the moment where it's almost painful. It's not the easiest step, but I think it's truly there where you also find something new in the act of translation. Towards technology, I mean, what you said, like intuition, for us it's super important that it's true, we care a lot how the audience or the visitor perceives our final installation. So we often try to make this, to create a performative environment that touches the visitor on an emotional level, which for us doesn't mean we need to be non-digital and digital or non-technical, but it means we try to be very cutting edge with technology, but still try to reach the people on an emotional level. And for that, this step has to happen before and after. Sometimes what we heard it recently was said, we try to be metabolic, not metaphoric. Something that is reaching the how we design and how our design is perceived in the end, or touched. I mean, I don't think there is any other way than using the most of technology we have. Going back to just pure diagrams and just staying within there, we don't really do that, because we really think that in all the new technologies that we have, there lies a power of creativity that we can access and harness, as long as we don't get obsessed with it. So it's a tool to reach an emotion, a tool to reach an environment, an interaction, a communication. As I always say, like, it's the tool for a bubblefish. I don't know if someone knows it. Bubblefish is from Philip K. Dick. It's a fish that's living in the air, and it's translating. And this fish its own purpose is to translate between two different species. And we see a bit, or I see, speaking up for me, I see architecture very much like that. To have this capability of a translation, a mediator between two species, two entities, very much connective.
We lost Daniel.
We lost Daniel.
Keep on going, Tiziana.
Happen also in the design process.
We have
because you partially unpredictable.
We lost you.
Oh,
Last sentence. We lost.
never mind. No, what I was saying is, I mean, using computational methods is for us also to allow the unpredictability within the design a lot. That's part of the design thinking, design process, because that cannot just happen in the end as a surprise. It's very much happening from the first moment you start something. Tiziano, you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, just connecting to you, Gonzalo. I don't know about the black box, no? This kind of technology as a black box, or which I really understand as a sort of image, no? But somehow I have the feeling, and also connecting it to the idea of the intuition, it's about opening black boxes. I don't know. It's not about one totalizing black box, but it's more about the attitude of opening them. Yeah, and this is becoming easier and easier, because of course there are, like, for example, the idea of equipping universities with robotic arms, or really sort of shortening the gap between what is high level sort of industry and the capacity we have to experiment with these tools. You know, the moment we are kind of shortening this gap, then we start to be very creative, I think, with those technologies. And I think, I mean, the question of intuition comes with how far, of course, how close you can experiment with the specific technology, no? So in our case, the moment we pass, for example, to another discipline, then there is a moment of that almost necessity to shorten immediately the gap, you know, the gap also negotiation of vocabularies between you and a scientist, for example. So there is this kind of intuition, I think, comes with a larger proximity with this kind of technologies.
But also you could say that intuition starts when you stay away, right? Because I think that, I know I find it interesting what you say. I think it all depends on, you know, the tool. You drive the tool when you really know it. If not, it drives you, and then you're never able to do what you really want to do. And so I think that's why I just try to say maybe it's the opposite, because I mean, this is a point right now, everything is so specialized, and you have to be a specialist in whatever you're talking about, in robotics, in using machine learning. You have to be a specialist at doing it. Otherwise, you better not even get into it, because you will not go near the point of being intuitive within that tool, right? And how can we be specialists about everything? So I'm just trying to make the other case that actually, if you stay away and then utilize, of course, together with the specialist, but you cannot be the specialist of all of it, right? You stay back and you have an intuition how that technology, where it can lead to, but the kind of the thought doesn't come from within that specialty, but sort of from another point of view. Do you know what I mean? So it's a little bit the opposite thinking, like stay back and keep the overview of and where do you want to go, and then find the tools that allow you to go there.
Then in this sense, probably what I would say you will agree, all of you, is that there is not anymore this sense of positivistic use of technology as whatever thing it's going to, I would not say save us or solve all our problems, but actually to some extent one can look wherever it is through intuition or a kind of means. Someone will call it the unexpected, someone will call it a failure within what we expect a machine can do, right? In order to see these opportunities within the use of technology. But I think it is clear that there are more than one way of using whatever thing we engage with, whether this is AR, and then actually what this I find this pairing or these different or similar stances in how one can approach technology, because it's not one way, right? And this is somehow clear for at least in what I get from these two presentations. Another couple of topics that I have, one is a little bit more transcendental, the other one is a bit more practical. I will start from the tough one, which is the transcendental one, and this is something that came from especially in the second in the project of the bats, right? That you somehow create a mixture of all possible things that you can think to bring in a project, you bring it in, right? And you always speak about these differences, that there is not always a privileged subject, but there is a different agencies within that. Within the case of the project, in that project, I even would question what will be the role of the human, right? Even not as a designer, but as a spectator. Beside the question of, yeah, you have the format of the exhibition, we need some humans, someone needs to pay that, yeah? But putting this question aside, the thing is that how is for you, or does architecture transcend the human as the spectator? I would again ask you to both of you, what is the role of the human as a spectator in your architecture or your idea of architecture? I will call with the bats.
Difficult question.
Yeah, I thought there was a transcendental one. So.
You know, both projects, actually, also the SOL project, we worked a lot on, we asked ourselves continuously, what's then the role of the human in this new environment? We always say that we try to make it a flat hierarchy, which means that we are not the most important passenger in this landscape, in the environment. Things are seen equally important, and hierarchies are questioned, which means visitors may become tourists, even though it's a structure installed for them. For the bats, it's almost like the more we work just for the bats, the more we define what makes us human. Because the more we see the world through a different lens, and by that expanding what we are almost confined to. So I would say the human will not be deleted. It's more like a reshuffling of hierarchical structures, and try out change of perspectives, even though we understand we will never see the world as a bat sees the world. But just the understanding that there is a different way of seeing, for instance, structure and geometry, makes to start us understand that, for instance, what we perceive just visually might not be the reality of things. So even to just work with the bat echolocation, we immediately focus back on us. What does that mean? And what are the different senses that we talk to that are, for instance, not just visual? So I think it's very much entangled with our presence in all projects.
But also, I mean, I would add it's also what is interesting for us was, especially with this project, is it really discuss this dominance of visuality, no? We have as a humans, no? So it's almost like I mean, the visual spectrum is basically how we mostly perceive, no? Perceive reality. I mean, this is something that has been going on since forever, and was reinforced as well with this kind of all the Renaissance of the perspective, and anything that is kind of somehow reinforcing this idea of perceiving reality through visual cues. It's somehow falling into, is immediately sort of discrediting and limiting the other sort of senses, no, we have. So I think that there is also a very, very straightforward question here, which is, we know the need we have maybe for architecture to really expand, to use architecture as a medium to expand our capacities to sense the space, no? And this is happening as well, probably, I mean, in a different way with virtual reality, augmented reality a little bit, no? The problem of those technologies, somehow they're always mediated from a screen. So they're always mediated through a sort of, again, through a sort of this visual spectrum. So I don't know, I think to open up the discussion of how we can really reconstitute a little bit the built environment towards towards more sensible, you know, materialities, but as well, you know, phenomena as well, that are different than this visual dominance. I don't know. This, I don't know if it's a bit confusing what I said. Sorry.
No, I mean, I think I agree. You always try to look for the next step, right? But so for me, I mean, Gonzalo, you asked about the relationship to the human. So, I mean, that's why I'm always interested in, so how does it really translate into space and into something materialized? Because the spaces wherein they do influence us, there is a direct relationship of self-experience to spatial experience. And so I would say good architecture is always able to transform us as humans, right? So I think maybe it's old-fashioned to think that, but I think of architecture still for humans, and good architecture has that transformative quality for sure. And we're always trying to look for that next step of how to see space. And I agree that these kind of experiments help maybe to find a way to access that next dimension that we're all looking for. But for me, it gets really interesting when I try to think, so, okay, how do you translate into architecture, into the space that we experience as a space around us? I think that's the hardest part in all of that, because then it is something static. Then you have to find a way to build the liveliness into the architecture, right? Not into other media. And I think it's possible. And it's what I would look for in finding, actually.
Mm-hmm. So I have, again, a bunch of other topics. I will just go for the easy question, and then I will open to the audience. So you can also hit a question in the chat if you want, or just ask for voice, and you can ask.
Maybe there's some other statements too, right? So that it's not so interrogative.
Or contradictions.
Is it getting? I mean, I was just looking for blood in between the two of you, because it's what gives money and audience. But I think you are. I will just put the very last opposition, and then we open everything up. And this is actually the second point, which is the mode of practice, right? And I think some questions or issues or topics came out of that. One is the question of a scale that you mentioned before, Carlin, that obviously, and this limitation of a scale, I would like to know if this is something that is a question of infrastructure, rather that meaning, as in the case of Daniel and Tiziano, as an office with 3-4 years trajectory. Is it something that scale? It's something to be gained throughout the years, right? And then now you need to look for alternative ways of exploring other architectural expressions. And I don't know if this is again something that again is a medium for this larger goal, that obviously we want to build a 5,000 museum somewhere else in a nice spot. And on the contrary, or on the other side, there is Schmidbaur as a well-established office, again, that I would say never relies on a comfort zone. If I understand also the ideology of the projects, that they want also, for instance, bring in new ideas through the technology, etc., and how one can also structure such a prominent office, because you also have your own, if I understood right, your own kind of research department, right? So you are not only in the acquisition of projects and building large projects, but you are also in this pushing the boundary of what we can understand as architecture. So I don't know, again, if I can make this comment shorter, will be the question of mode of practice in relations to a scale. And yes.
Well, I'll just say something. I mean, I tried to mention it before. There is this kind of investigation on the side, and it's a huge luxury to have, but it's also really important. Let's say what I briefly showed, and I didn't dare to go more into detail, but because you said we should use 20 minutes. What I try to touch on and show is the research we currently do in using AI, for example. So it's on the side, it's there, it's done without immediately being plugged into, like, let's say, a commissioned project. And eventually, though, the thinking is always, how can we plug it in? And there is a sort of balance between how much, is done sort of in this work on the side, but it's always there and it's always been there. And this is where a lot of ideas come from, of course, because you have to get into, you have to get a ways into an investigation before you can see how you can use it. And so AI is just a question, but it's the same with robotics. It's the same with, all the other tools that now are sort of becoming stuff we don't even talk about anymore. It becomes normal to use them, right? Simulations or whatever it was at the time. And so that work goes on parallel. And I think it has to, because it informs sort of possible next steps. But it's not, I think it's not possible to do in the large work immediately. And in my opinion, and I've tried to show a few of those projects, it's the smaller projects that are the ones where you get to experiment, and not the large projects. That is not possible, I think, at least in the cases I know. I mean, you also experiment, but not as not in such unknown as you would do in the small projects, obviously. So different things like doing exhibitions. Again, I didn't show any of that, but doing exhibitions, doing work in a different scale and with a different audience and with a different goal than, let's say, to realize a building that has to go through the market. It has a client. It has so many constraints. It's a different area to be experimenting in. So that also goes on the side.
Werner, you wanna go?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. For us, I mean, the question is, of course, the idea, for example, of introducing a new material into a building. No, the construction of a building is by default a sort of an impossible task somehow. Right now, with all the regulations, all the standards, all this, so there is of course, there is almost the need to create a context where you can test. Let's say faster, no? To shorten also the time of the architecture that is very, very long. No? It's a kind of so in terms of practice, I see that of course this see first these small interventions, or let's say different contexts of intervention as a preparatory work for a potential upscaling. So whatever we do, I think we have always in mind this projection of the architectural scale, or the dream about it somehow. No? But I think there are also so many different contexts that needs to develop around to make it really possible. So Yeah.
And I think one thing that we really learned as a young office is how to make projects that are quite radical and how to fund them. And I think that's really something that you had to learn, or that we had to learn as a young office. If you do radical projects, you want to do a project, it's radical. How do you fund it? How do you fund the research? And that's really something that we was necessary to learn, and it's definitely something we didn't know about. And that really came with huge pain because it came out of a huge desire. And it's something where we looked a lot into the art world, and we looked a lot into science funds. And we always are on the fringe. We are never truly artists. We are never truly scientists. We are architects that touch and combine these things. And that's really something that we had to learn through doing it. The first times you apply for grants, the first time, no one teaches you that at university. They always say you go ahead and you're going to win the first competition. But what if you don't? And you still want to do stuff. You still have ideas. And that's really something that we had to learn. And we had to start to navigate in between a lot of worlds to work on the projects that were close to our hearts. And it's true that we always, even a small model for us means a building. So even if we are now at this scale, we always think it as a building. Of course, you go through all the complexities that are different then. But from the approach that we are working towards it, we never forget the building scale. So even if you see an artificial flower that has this kind of scale, the spatial articulation of it is then something that we really, really work on. And I think to get out of the area of architecture, to get funds to do projects that are still architectural is really something that we had to do. There was no other way. Sure, we could have not done the projects, but to do projects that are maybe have a factor that could change architecture in a specific area, maybe you have to start to develop new talents in learning how to do projects. And on the long run, I mean, with all projects, we are still architects. And that's something quite interesting, because even if we are in the field of art, for instance, that's something that artists always tell us, and we sometimes forget it, that they are saying it's special because you're architects. You see the world differently than an artist, than someone else. So not to be scared to stay within architecture or to leave the field of architecture, you still stay architects. Doesn't go away.
Okay, so now it seems that I'm forced to be democratic and open the discussions. I cannot keep the three of you just for me, unfortunately. So I will open you up to the audience, and so if someone's
here from Schmidbaur should help me.
Yeah, I saw it pop up.
Who is here?
Is there any question? If not, I can keep on asking. So.
Oh, I would like to comment a bit.
Yeah.
Maybe a comment. Exactly.
Peter.
This is Peter.
You would say something.
You know, I don't have a question. I have more comment, and I wanted to first of all thank you all for the talks. Really nice, really interesting. And the IARC, thank you for organization. Again, a very good event. And I think what I want to comment on is a bit like I was struggling with the topic that it is technology and practice. And I was not sure, like when the discussion started, that this started with the technology and if it is a tool, if it is a technique, and that I think that are very important questions. Like there's always this very superficial quote from Cedric Price with technology is the answer. What was again the question? And that comes always back in my mind when we see very extreme developments, especially in architecture. And I think how now the discussion developed into the practice question, I think that is much more interesting in these terms, because we have, I think, as Daniela as well said, two very radical approaches. Schmidbaur is a very radical approach towards architecture, and MADE is a very radical approach towards architecture. And I think the technology thing, it comes along with that. But I think the approach to practice is much more important to discuss. And I think it is not, I mean, of course, there is a difference of scale and of course of time of practice. But I think that is under the line, it's all the same for me. It is if we have like this huge pot of architecture, these two approaches are on the very extremes, but on the polarity of one side, I think. And what I would, if that can become a question, I would rather ask if that is a kind of a bubble what we are talking about. When we are looking at your projects, so Schmidbaur and MADE. And I mean, I think it is important to have extremes at the university, because university is research. There was as well a comment from Daniela. I really appreciated like to try to learn how to fund those kinds of projects, because it is unbelievably complicated. And then it becomes a mix up between practice and research, what is as well quite interesting. And I think that we should think about or talk about as well what is beyond our ecosystem of research, beyond our ecosystem of extremes. And without saying the rest of it is not valid or is just boring, because I mean there is something under the waterline of the iceberg, and it is of course boring architecture. But is there something else? That is maybe the question, beside our extremes. But again, thank you very much. It was super interesting.
I think it's a great comment, Peter, because it is about how you approach practice. That's at the beginning of it. I mean, in a way, that's for me also encapsulated in that you formulate a desire of what you want to do and what is in that desire, right? Then you find a way of getting, or you expressing that, and that's what drives everything. Doesn't matter in what scale, I guess.
It's true, we are a bit of a bubble. I think you are right.
I actually want to know what you mean with a bubble. This kind of
I mean,
the kind of attitude towards architecture, you call that the bubble, or?
No, I would say like, for instance, if we say in a practice that it is really like go into radical projects, I mean, it is not like not the first idea is maybe to have a contract or a commission. Of course, that is a worrying way of making architecture, going to a competition, making a proposal and build the proposal, right? But having in that the desire to make something what is not out of the box, or I mean, it becomes I have to really be careful with the terminology, because I think it is at some parts in both of your presentations as well, it becomes too pour out, as one would say maybe. And then the driver becomes the technology as well. And I think it is super interesting, but the bubble is that it is primarily, I think, an artistic approach, and it is an approach to space, of course. But it is a certain, if we think that every building, our whole environment would look like your projects, that would be quite crazy, I think. So
wouldn't that be great?
maybe it is great, but I think it is it's like always has to be somewhat balanced. And I'm not talking about the really boring normal architecture. I'm just saying like that your two positions are quite in the extreme, and that builds its own bubble, so to say. Yeah. So I don't know, but I'm in that bubble, so I don't know either what is actually beyond that. Next to the boring things what surround us to 99%, of course. But it should be something else. But it is not a question again. Like it's just commenting on that because I think it is. We are in that bubble, and I guess we do not have an answer to that question really. But yeah.
I mean, we saw, I don't know, I mean, we were in quite some conference lately. I don't know, it's also, we assist as well the generation like ours of young, let's say, practitioners, or I don't know, or people desiring the practice, let's say, that are normalizing a lot the desire of the architecture to negotiate with the other extreme of the bubble. And this, we found it, I think, a little bit problematic when you have to normalize your desires or your vision of architecture, because it's needed somehow, no?
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is also problematic. I think so. It's problematic to have, I think, a very artistic approach that is not referring to, let's say, I don't know, like you say, the other extreme, no? But it's also problematic to lose the vision because of this kind of normalization of the desire of of doing a different architecture, no? I mean, especially Mitterberger, I think it's one of these examples actually that they started. They started from a very different kind of interventions, no? If I remember, I think all the first years of Mitterberger, they were extremely inspiring for many generations and they're still, no, because they were exactly dealing with this the desire of the desire of different architecture. I think, I think we are lucky. I mean, to have Caroline here to supporting the talk somehow, because I think our studio, Mitterberger, it's really supporting this transition from.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you talk about the early days. I mean, I didn't witness those, right? The early days of Schmidbaur. And when I stepped in, sort of, it was already when it moved into really building in a big scale. And so I haven't witnessed actually that sort of early phase of such a practice. And in a way, I'm lucky to kind of see how it actually, what it means to build on top of that, right? I mean, I don't mean to build buildings only, but to build sort of on that foundation. But first you have to lay it. And like, I don't know exactly where you guys are, but it's always how it starts, I would think.
I mean, I think what's really interesting is the desire to look to the future rather than the desire to look at the past. And I think that's something that really that I think is in both, that people are never lost, the desire to not be retro, to really always reinvent, and sometimes it's great, sometimes but it's always a desire to not look back into the past. And I think that's also something that we really, really push. And because the future is the only thing that matters, right? And it's this, you see a lot of trends now, because you asked what's outside the bubble now. See a lot of trends that are very focused on reliving past again, it comes in waves. But I think it's really something that we really try to aim at, to focus on what is possible. That's why we use these technologies, not as a pure need to use these technologies, but actually trying to incorporate things that will come. And we need to understand what they mean for us. And we need to understand what they mean through experiments. Because when they will be common ground, we should already be very familiar with it. And I think there's no way to escape that. I mean, Caroline, you talked before that the issue that now we have to be a specialist in so many things. I think especially as a young architect, it's true. I mean, we need to have an overview on robotic fabrication, machine learning, digital. If you go in this specific area, I'm not saying that all, but if you really drive towards new possibilities within the special digital architecture and digital fabrication, you need to become a special, or at least knowledgeable. And I think that's something that seems quite difficult, but at the same time, it was never that easy to become knowledgeable. And to fight what's said before, the black box of technology, we need to understand. And I think at the same time, when Grasshopper and all this software started to be developed, a lot of architects just trust in the softwares that were developed for them. And I think that's another big issue that you see, is we need to understand what they mean, because they are driving your design if you don't understand. And it's the same thing with everything that's high. I mean, you see it a lot with machine learning now. We architects use it in experience, but we don't understand what it means for space. It's very 2D, it's very virtual, but what does it actually mean for our act of designing, for our act of living? What does it mean politically? What does it mean technically? And I think that's something that I hope the bubble gets bigger and more people try, because it's important. It's important on a political level. Otherwise, it's true, technology will just drive you, and everything will look like a Grasshopper plugin.
I think that is maybe the answer, yeah, like to explore the technology more and to pass the bubble with the tools, of course.
Yeah,
I absolutely 100% agree with that. What you said is like going with all the fingers in every direction. I think you're proving that as well in your practice with your transdisciplinary approach. And maybe that is already behind the bubble, and I absolutely agree that we should not look into the history in that way and don't be retro. But yeah, that could be actually one way to pass the bubble, is like going to explore the technologies in general, to all the disciplines who think they know how it works better than we are. That was maybe failure in the history of architecture as well.
But still keep the feet on the ground somehow, right? I mean, I always get a bit scared when it's all in the box. I think you need the balance.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, we're also outside of the physical, right? You lose sense of yourself, you lose sense of your surroundings. And if you completely go inside the box and like the square grid we see each other at now, right?
I would like, I mean, we are already over 2 hours. So in order not to keep it really, really long, I will ask, actually I will ask a student, if possible, to be engaged with the conversation of if someone has an extra comment.
I would have a question from outside of the bubble, if there's no student who wants to ask something.
Yes, sure, go, Florina.
So thank you for the talk. And I was quite intrigued, surprised and intrigued in Caroline's presentation when you were describing the right-here transition from the analog process to the digital one. And what surprised me so much is that you kind of kept this analog start in the design process, which you then kind of digitalized. And like you had this in the kind of 90s project and then in the 2000s. And then I thought it's quite interesting that you kept it in the process. And I wanted to ask why it's that important, like to still start with kind of a physical model and then explore the digital world.
Well, because you can only judge architecture in the physical. And so, I mean, maybe sometimes even a process may start in the digital, but then it's immediately put back into the analog to judge it, to see it in. We always have worked with models, and we do it at every scale. And yes, typically the process starts with a physical model, a massing model, or whatever the project is. And then there is a model in every scale up to the interiors. And it's a back and forth process because you cannot judge what you have if you don't have it there physically, and you see it, you walk around it, you touch it. It's just what we believe. And I think, I mean, I see it when I just think when you have your 3D model in the computer, you don't know what you have. You just don't know it. And so that's why it's always outputted. And then we manipulate things digitally, it goes back out into the physical. And it gets manipulated in the physical and it goes back and forth. And I mean, I showed these different tools and it's nice that you're picking up on it. There's also always been a belief that when you do quick physical models, and the emphasis is also on quick, these are study models. You work with the model just like you work with the pen or so. And there is an immediacy in doing that also eliminates sometimes sort of logic thought. And something comes through that you don't know, maybe you're not at the time aware of it. And that the digital also allows you to capture it, so that translation is actually a tricky thing, to go from the analog back into the digital, because it's not a literal translation either. But these tools, of course, help us. I mean, without the tools, very, very long time ago, we would measure the models, literally. So it's not just an eyeballing thing, but really trying to get at what it is that it needs to retain in a way in the building. So yeah, is that an answer?
Yeah, it's super exciting, actually. It's super exciting. And like one more little question. Do you think this happens, like the fact that this physicality is also like working with, like the sketch, the model, is still so important for you in the process because maybe you started like this, you know, because you started drawing and then you had the transition to the digital, but you kind of didn't start with a kind of a digital process, and then you didn't consider the analog anymore.
Yeah, I wonder about that, because I certainly know that my brain is not digitally trained, right? If I just speak about myself, and I mean, we can only try to interpolate how it is for others by looking at ourselves. And when I see younger people now, I can see that they're much more comfortable in the digital world, obviously. But I still believe when it comes to understanding what they're doing as architecture, they profit from the combination between the analog and the digital. And I believe so. And I think when you look at the work, you see it too. It's different.
Yes, I agree. It's
That's
different.
why I think that's why I don't know, I try to go as a step forward deliberately in that combination again, even in trying to, not only for like myself, right? But I really believe that there is a difference whether something is only developed in the analog or only in the digital or in the combination. And I think in the connection is the interesting part.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think that if there is not any additional comment, I think we can leave it here. Again, the purpose of these talks, it's rather to put topics on the table, keep things open and discuss. And next time you meet any of these three persons on the corridor of the university, stop them and ask them what was unanswered in this talk, right? That's been said, I want to thank you, the three of you, for taking the time and explaining projects, topics, ideas, ambitions. And beside that, I don't know if you want to say something else. If not, any extra
Thanks
words?
for having us.
Okay.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Thank you for it.
Thank you for organizing it. It was very interesting.
The whole series, it's a really nice thing that you all have brought to life.
Hopefully this is just the first semester for a very long one established series, let's say. So Florina, we already need to work for the summer semester.
And I hope not via Zoom anymore. I mean, Zoom is great, but
yes, absolutely.
Physical is better.
So that's been said, I would like to invite all the people for our last session this semester, which will be mid-January. So hopefully you will receive on time all the links, if this is not possible of doing in person. That's been said, thank you everyone, and see you soon.
Thank you.
Ciao, see you.